Hi, I'm Cassie and welcome back to my kitchen here in Japan, where today we're going to make a simple stock out of vegetable scraps. So if, like me, you do a lot of cooking, then you probably end up with quite a lot of vegetable waste, but you can actually use those vegetable scraps in this kind of stock so that you can flavour your pastas and soups and things like that. And it's really easy because you're basically just using the leftovers from something you've already prepared and then just boiling them up. But there are some good and bad vegetables that you can use in a vegetable scrap stock, so here is a non-exhaustive list of some of the good candidates for a vegetable scrap stock. But think about things that have a mild flavour. Things like onions, carrots and celery are a really good candidate because they're things that you would use in a normal stock anyway, like a chicken stock, as a flavour base. But other things like tomatoes and leeks and the stems of herbs, they can all be used as well. And you can really just use every part of those vegetables. So you can use the root of the onion, you can use the skin of the onion, as long as it's clean. You can use the leaves of a carrot, you can use the leaves of a celery. Really anything that you were thinking of throwing away, you can just pop in this stock. Likewise, there are some things that you don't want to put in the stock. So again, here is a non-exhaustive list of things that aren't really a good candidate for this scrap stock. So some things to avoid are things like cruciferous vegetables, which are like broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage. Those generally give a little bit of a bitter taste or have a kind of funky smell. You also don't want to use anything that has too powerful of a flavour, because then that will basically just overpower anything else in the stock. And that kind of defeats the purpose of having a general purpose stock that you can just use as a little bit of extra flavour in a pasta or in a soup. You also don't want to use anything that is rotten. It's still rotten, it's still bad for you. So just because you didn't use that green potato for your dinner last night doesn't mean you should put it in this stock. It's still a green potato. Also, you generally want to make sure that everything is nice and clean, so give it a good wash before you use it. And I said that you can use things like onion root, but particularly with onion root, it can get quite dirty and there can be a lot of soil trapped in the roots. So if it looks like that, and even once you've cleaned it and it still looks kind of dirty, then just cut off the dirty part. We don't want any soil in our vegetable stock. And lastly, there are the things that have a particular flavour profile, like these, which you can use in your stock, but you might want to keep that stock for a particular dish that you know you're going to make, rather than using it as your regular base stock. For example, things like coriander or lemongrass that might go quite well in a Thai dish, but they might clash a bit if you try to make something like a risotto. And of course, the colour and flavour are really going to vary depending on what you put into this stock. And because we're using a lot of scraps, then generally it's going to be a kind of browny, orangey colour. So that is important to keep in mind for things where the aesthetic is important. So for example, if you want to have a nice white, pristine risotto, then you don't really want to use this vegetable scrap stock because you'll probably end up with a kind of muddy brown risotto. So once you've collected all of your scraps, then you can add in a few flavourings as well. And I would highly recommend that because it really just levels it up. So even though they have quite a powerful flavour, I put garlic in basically everything that I do, so I always put in a few garlic cloves whole into this stock. You can leave the skin on, and then because we're not boiling this for too long, then at the end when you take everything out, you can take out those cloves and just squish out the garlic, and you can use that on bread or on your pasta, and it's just really tasty. You can also add in things like a teaspoon of whole black peppercorns, or maybe herbs like a bay leaf. I don't usually put salt into this simply because I'm going to be putting this into another dish which I'll always season anyway, so I don't want to mess up the level of salt and make it too salty. Then you just fill it up with water until the scraps just start to float. I usually do this by eye. Then bring it up to a boil. Once it's boiling, turn the heat back down to a simmer and then just cover it and simmer for about half an hour. This does make a kind of small amount of not very strong stock, so if you want your stock to be stronger or you want to make a bigger batch, then you can freeze your scraps instead. And then once you've got about 800 grams or a kilo of vegetable scraps, then you can make an even bigger stock. But if you are using frozen scraps, then you only need to cook it for 15 minutes. Because it's much easier for the flavours and water to come out when they've been frozen. And if you do it for too long, depending on what you have in there, you might end up with a quite sweet stock, which you don't really want. Then once it's been cooking for either 15 minutes or 30 minutes, then all you have to do is strain it into a container and keep those little garlic cloves, and refrigerate it for up to a week or freeze it for up to 3 months. Then you can just use it whenever you want, when you think a dish is just missing that little extra something. If you learned anything at all, then don't forget to subscribe, but that is it for our vegetable scrap stock, so I will see you next Sunday.